The President, Mr. Kope, indeed you will have about 5 minutes to prepare for this, because it also important that the AV unit needs this amount of time before everything is now reset to the normal courtroom proceedings. The President, Mr. Victor Kope, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. The information, Mr. President, Your Honours, we received yesterday, the urgent new information, was in the form of an email from a person to whom we refer to as TCW 382. As the Chamber knows, TCW 382 co-wrote the screenplay for Enemies of the People and the related film One Day at Portray. His email was delivered yesterday at 16:39 to my colleague Michiel Pestman, who transmitted the email to our legal consultants, who in turn forwarded to me. TCW 382's email was unsolicited. We have just forwarded the email to the Chamber and to all of the parties. And the full text of TCW 382's email reads as follows, and I quote, "Dear Victor, from reading the Phnom Penh Post's account of the trial proceedings yesterday, it seems there may have been a misunderstanding about what Nguyen Chia said in our DVD. He did not, emphasize not, he did not agree that top Lon Nol officers had been killed. What he said was that half a dozen Lon Nol cabinet and top officials had been put through revolutionary due process and condemned to death by a military tribunal, which from memory Nguyen Chia was not part of. It should be added that Radio Phnom Penh, the official state radio station, broadcast announcements of these executions at the time and gave the same rationale as Nguyen Chia does in our DVD. Nguyen Chia does not admit direct responsibility for executing the Lon Nol cabinet members. Rather, he asserts that the rationale was correct. Of course, that rationale is no different from US killing bin Laden, etc. I hope that the evidence to the court makes it clear that there really is little prosecutorial value in what is reported to have been used of our film in this instance. And now, Mr. President, the important part from the email, and it says, I quote, "By the way, regarding Portray, this was a massacre ordered by Rosnin, not Central Command. We have amassed a wealth of evidence about NIM's agenda, but have been so far unable to complete our second film due to the co-producer being in the US for personal reasons. Yours sincerely, TCW 382. Your Honors, this information, this new information which has come to light is obviously extremely important. But let me explain exactly why and how it relates to Mr. Hedder's testimony. First, TCW 382 may be in possession of information that is directly exculpatory for Nguyen Chia as to the charges at Tool Boat Tray. If indeed TCW 382 possesses this information, and if it shows what he claims, it would vindicate exactly the position we have taken for months, including in our submissions just 2 days ago. And it even involves Ros Nim, whose responsibility for the events at Tool Boat Tray we have previously explored before the Chamber. Second, the evidence TCW 382 claims to have concerning Ros Nim directly corroborates the position we have taken countless times for years about command structures in democratic Kampuchea and the role of zone leaders. That information relates directly to Mr. Hedder, whose analysis has previously been central to our claims in that regard. It appears that the list of Mr. Hedder's interviews provided by the prosecution yesterday include numerous interviews with cadres from the Northwest Zone. Mr. Hedder is therefore likely to be in a position to give testimony concerning the exact same facts as TCW 382. Third, Mr. President, TCW 382 may be in possession of information that is directly exculpatory for our client in relation to the alleged execution of top Lon Nol officials, which the prosecution says is within the scope of this trial. More to the point, TCW 382 may be able to explain that the video that he himself produced and which the prosecution relies on for inculpatory purposes is in fact exculpatory. That testimony, the testimony of TCW 382, would vindicate the submissions previously made by the defense for Khieu Samphan in relation to the admissibility of this video, and by us, of course, 2 days ago in relation to its probative value. Specifically, Mr. President, that it is a partial and selective treatment of thousands of hours of tape. And in light of all this, of this new information, Mr. President, we have three related requests. First, we ask the Chamber to admit this email as evidence, as new evidence, pursuant to Rule 87, Paragraph 4. The email was previously unavailable to us and is clearly very relevant. And it is also similar in form to Ted Sambat's book, which the prosecution has relied on extensively. Second, we request that the Chamber summons TCW 382 to appear before the Chamber and or undertake further investigation pursuant to Rule 93. And third, we seek an immediate adjournment of Mr. Hedder's testimony pending the outcome of that investigation. An adjournment is necessary so that we have as full a record as possible prior to questioning Mr. Hedder on this subject of central and crucial relevance to this trial. Thank you, Mr. President.
The President. Thank you, Counsel. Mr. Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President and Your Honours. Mr. President, I thought that the era of devices and stunts from the defence had come to an end with the previous defence team. The submission you have just heard shows that devices and stunts are still very high on the agenda of the Nguyen Chia defence team. In my respectful submission, it is nothing short of scandalous to make an application to this court, and I deal with the third one, to adjourn the testimony of Mr. Hedder. To seek to adjourn his testimony on the grounds that the defence have an email from somebody who was a producer of a film who was not present when Nguyen Chia was being spoken to, who is giving commentary about what Nguyen Chia said on the DVD, that's entirely not a matter for Mr. Lemkin. It's a matter for you. You have the DVD on the case file. You can see and hear what Nguyen Chia said. You do not need a scrap of assistance from Mr. Lemkin. He may be in possession of information if he possesses the information. We don't know what the information is about Ross Nim. If the defence are in possession of information, call it, or make an application to call it. Don't come before the court asking to adjourn the testimony of a witness because we may have some information that may be relevant. It may be entirely irrelevant. He claims to have information that directly corroborates something. And then we have Mr. Hedder introduced as the sideshow to this application, trying desperately somehow to link the producer of this film with Mr. Hedder. And then we have the further problem for the defence, talking about Mr. Hedder's analysis. Mr. Hedder is not here to provide you, judges, with analysis, because analysis comes from experts. He is not an expert witness. He cannot give you an analysis, because an analysis is about the interpretation of facts, not what the facts are and what evidence goes to support the facts. The producer talking about partial and selective information. This, in my respectful submission, is an attempt to try and package a routine Section 87.4 application and trying to make it stick to Mr. Hedder. That, in my respectful submission, is dishonest at worst and disingenuous at best. Can I deal with the three particular points? Do you admit the email? Well, what if the prosecution said, we've got an email from somebody who says another film on the court's archive doesn't properly reflect what somebody said on the film? It's ridiculous. What was said on the film is shown on the film. You don't need anybody else's interpretation or to help you whether there was a misunderstanding. And I stress, especially from someone who was not even present when this interview was taken. He's the producer. He's not even there. He can't help you with what was said. It's shown on the DVD. So what evidential purpose, what relevance does this email have? And the answer is absolutely none. And then an email comment. There's really little prosecutorial value. He's not here to comment on the prosecution. He's not a witness that can help this court. See through this charade for what it is. It's showboating. It's a device. It's a stunt. Another stunt from the same team. Courts are about applications and evidence. They're not about showboating for the press or making stunts in this court. This email cannot help you at all in ascertaining the truth, and I invite you to reject now, not in a week's time, not in due course, reject now, orally, this application. This email has no use. If the defence want to come with a lever arch file of statements relevant to Rosneft, relevant to implementation at Tool-Portray, then bring them to the court. Don't try and ask for adjournments on speculative evidence. We don't even know what they have. And the email talks about, we've got a wealth of evidence about Rosnim's agenda. You're not interested in agendas. You're interested in this case with Tool-Portray about what actually happened at Tool-Portray, not what agendas were. If the defence have the material, get it and make a proper application. Don't try and interrupt this witness with this device. Secondly, summoning TCW 382. To say what? I was the producer of a film and I want to tell the court that what's shown on the film, there's been a misunderstanding. It's a nonsense. If the defence want to come up with a reason why he can give direct evidence that helps you, then do so. I'm reminded by my learned colleague who sits next to me, here's the flavour of the producer of this film. We asked him to provide, or OCIJ asked him to provide the film. No, I refuse. How did OCP get this film? Mr. President, it was purchased off Amazon on the internet. This person cannot assist this court on the current information. If there's the Rosneft binders containing relevant and admissible evidence, that may be another thing. But at this stage, summoning a witness would be inviting a witness into Alice in Wonderland. And then the most egregious part of this application, the third part. To seek to adjourn Mr. Hedder's testimony because he's taken perhaps some statements from Northwest Zone soldiers who we might have some evidence about, but we're not sure because we don't know what's being said about Rosneft. If the defence want to put questions to Mr. Hedder, not about his analysis of Tool-Portray, because that's impermissible, if they want to put evidence about something he has written about Tool-Portray, get on and do it. I stress what you have said in 3 emails to the parties. The purpose of Mr. Hedder's testimony is for him to give testimony on books and articles authored by him, interviews conducted by him, and matters of which he has a direct personal involvement. He is not here to give analysis about Tool-Portray or analysis or opinion evidence about any other matter. I stress that I ask you to deal with this matter now, peremptorily, quickly, and consign all 3 of these applications to where they belong. Let's stop the devices and get on with the evidence.
The President, Mr. Kope, please hold on. Madam Lead Co-Lawyer for the civil parties, you may proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to you. Good morning to your honors. Good morning to everyone. I would like to add a few words to what was said by the prosecutor, and I will say first of all that I entirely support him as well as his position regarding the three requests made by the Nguyen Chia defense. I must say that I'm quite flabbergasted by this submission this morning, even if I understood since yesterday that at this juncture in the trial anything could be possible and anything could be requested, whether this is grounded or not. And I am flabbergasted also by the means used, that is to say, to warning us at the last minute without giving us the slightest piece of information on the submission that was going to be made. I also must say that I am, and to speak lightly, somewhat distrustful of this email coming from nowhere at the very last moment, coming from someone who is a producer and now who is being presented as a co-author, and who suddenly would become to give his opinion in a serious judicial proceeding taking place for the past 18 months. There is a film on the case file, a film that was not visioned, that has been seen since the beginning, piece by piece, that everyone can watch, and that is essentially in the Khmer language, with Mr. Nguyen Chia's face being featured and Mr. Nguyen Chia speaking Khmer. And now, suddenly, we have a producer of this film who allegedly would be telling us what Nguyen Chia is telling us when you see him. Well, this is completely extraordinarily wrong. I find this completely off the track, and I am surprised to see that this film is being that this is being considered. The film is there, and the chamber can form its own idea without extra comments from a man who is not a jurist and who is not participating in these serious judicial proceedings. My comments also pertain to the film One Day at Tulpul Shrey, which we have here again seen people speaking Khmer in the film without the name Rosnim being mentioned, unless I'm mistaken. No matter what, I believe that the slightest thing to do to give a semblance of pertinence to the defense's application is to submit a written submission pursuant to Article 87.4 to try to support this submission. This is what they should have done. They should have explained to us how an email, such as the email that we have just heard right now very, very rapidly, could justify that an extra piece of evidence would be put before the chamber and that extra testimony be requested. My colleague chose another path. He is asking you to rule today on an oral submission. And I am asking the chamber, in fact, to do so as quickly as possible and not to offer him the possibility that he did not use earlier to make a written submission. Since the request is oral, the chamber may rule on it now. And I believe that based on what the co-prosecutor said, and I support entirely what he's saying, the chamber can reject the oral submission and reject the request that this email be put before the chamber. This is not a serious submission, and the chamber should reject this submission. Of course, I'm asking the chamber also to reject the request to have this producer testify before the court. And finally, I'm still trying to understand the reasons that may justify us adjourning Mr. Hedder's testimony. We are all going to put questions to him for a sufficient amount of time. If the defense wishes to put questions on this topic to the witness, it may do so, but I feel that asking now to adjourn Mr. Hedder's testimony is quite clearly reflects the defense's intents, which is to postpone these hearings as much as possible. I'm asking, of course, therefore, the Chamber to reject this third request, which is absolutely groundless. Thank you.
The President. Thank you. Mr. Victor Kopi, you may proceed.
President, there's not a right of reply in my respectful submission. He's made his submissions and we've made ours.
Fine, Mr. President. I haven't heard actually anything interesting.
The President, the Chamber would like to hand over to Judge Sylvia Cartwright regarding the ruling by the bench regarding the application made by counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea. In his request, counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea made this, and now we would like to hand over to Judge Sylvia Cartwright to address this. And for the time being, we would like to pause the hearing of the testimony of Mr. Steve Heather temporarily.
Yes, thank you, President. The Chamber has decided as follows that it will not adjourn the testimony of the witness Steve Heather. Secondly, that the information provided thus far by counsel for Nuon Chea does not satisfy the Chamber that it fulfills the requirements of Rule 87.4. However, if the Nuon Chea defence team wishes to make an application in writing pursuant to Rule 87.4, then that should be done by Monday at 2 p.m. And should clearly identify which new evidence it wishes to place before the Chamber. Because of the brevity of time given for filing, this application, if filed, may be filed in English only, to be followed by Khmer as quickly as possible. President, does that encompass the ruling that you wish to make? Thank you.
The President, thank you. Court officer is now directed to bring in Mr. Steve Heather back into the courtroom so that we can hear his testimony. The President, thank you, Mr. Heather. Could you please be now reminded that please keep your distance from this console at this pace so that your responses to all questions will be properly rendered. And we would like to continue hearing your testimony, and the questions shall be now proceeded by the prosecution. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, Mr. Heather. I'd like to start by revisiting in a little more detail the time in 2005 when you led a SOAS team collecting evidence in Cambodia. Now, can you help us on how interviews were conducted? What I mean was there a consistent instruction on question and answers, note-taking, how the information was gathered, how the statements were produced? Can you just help us on that part, please?
Again, I think it requires a bit of clarification as regards academic work. It's a bit of a misnomer to describe it as so-as work. Academics aren't members of disciplined units or organizations that operate according to established internal rules or procedures. We're individual intellectuals, if you will, who function in those individual capacities. So there's no, for example, oversight by a head of department or another member of the SOAS structure as regards the work of any particular academic. So there were no, in that sense, there are no set rules. There are the sensibilities that one develops or as a result of one's studies and of one's work about how to go about eliciting and recording information. So, I mean, there's a general distinction between so-called structured interviews, where you have a prepared set of questions, maybe even a questionnaire that you use, or simple open questioning. And in this instance, the process was simple open questioning. The discussions, the interviews, if you will, were not recorded. My practice over many years has been to put the questions in Khmer and then to write down the answers in my notebook, or more recently in my computer, in English. So there's no Khmer version which then is subsequently translated. It's, if you will, simultaneous interpretation directly into a notebook. It was made clear that these were not anonymous, that the results of the interviews would be available either to history or possibly to the court, because, again, I wasn't on assignment, I wasn't acting under rogatory, I was functioning as a political historian or a political scientist, whichever of those two terms you prefer for describing my profession. And in that sense, it was, for better or for worse, very much the same way I had been doing interviews about matters related to the Khmer Rouge in power since I first began doing that in 1978, or the Khmer Rouge before they were in power, as I was doing as a journalist in 1973, 1975. So I guess to my academic colleagues, I would have to confess this is art, not science. That's the sort of the general outline. I don't know if that satisfies your question, your curiosity, or not.
It does. I've got two supplementals arising from your answer. Firstly, can you tell us, please, your level of proficiency in the Khmer language?
Well, you want to give me a test, an oral test, an in-court oral test. I think it's, with all due humility, it's recognized as near fluent. And to give you an example, it's still often the case, not always the case, but often the case, if I telephone someone in Khmer, they initially refuse to believe that I'm not a Cambodian. This still happens to me. I mean, it gets, of course, a bit rusty when I've been out of the country for a while. but the level of fluency that I have normally returns after a period of time. And that fluency is largely because actually I didn't study Khmer in the classroom. I did it, although with a textbook, on the ground from the very first day. What that means is that in contrast to, for example, my Chinese, which is rather formalistic, my Khmer is sort of street Khmer or paddy Khmer, very colloquial.
And could I just ask, I don't know if 1973 is the right starting point, but can you give us some idea when proficient in Khmer, when fluent in Khmer? From doing the textbooks and any other learning.
I mean, I had a head start, which was before I studied Khmer, I had learned Thai. And although genetically the languages are very different because of many years of interaction, there are a lot of similarities, particularly in terms of technical vocabulary. But even with that foundation, it was a year and a half of really hard work before I could have a reasonable conversation on most any topic and could read a text on most any topic. So by the time I left, or if you prefer, fled Cambodia in April 1975, I was pretty good, but not, I would say, actually absolutely fluent. The fluency is more a result of the time I spent on one or the other side of the Thai-Cambodian border between 1978 and 1984, where the immersion in a totally Khmer or sometimes Thai-speaking environment was total, and I had very little interaction with people who spoke any other language, such that by the early 80s, this level of near native sounding fluency, I think, was pretty much achieved.
It may become relevant later in my questioning, but can we address, or can you help us, level of fluency Thai, level of fluency Vietnamese, if that's applicable, level of fluency Chinese?
I think it's fair to say my Khmer spoken fluency is the best of the lot. In some ways, my reading Thai is better than my reading Khmer. And that's simply because there's a lot more to read in Thai than there is in Khmer. The number of texts there are to read in Khmer is still rather limited, and certainly relatively limited as compared to what's available in Thai. That said, particularly, I think it's fair to say, with regard to what in the academy is known as Stalin speak, that is to say, the particular political dialect that's used by in communist parties and communist societies.
Do you mind if I interrupt?
Yeah.
I just want to try and get, in fairly short order, if you can help me, level of proficiency in Thai, Vietnamese, Chinese, in fairly short answers, if I can, please.
1 to 4 Khmer, Thai, Chinese, Vietnamese, and last but not least, French.
Well, on Khmer, I'm a little bit more than Sombot Shweng in a taxi, but you're plainly well advanced. Now, can I deal next, please, with... You've mentioned 1978. Now, can I ask the question this way? I've obviously looked at an awful lot of interviews that you conducted, but can you help us? When was the first time, and I'm using 1978 as a marker, when was the first time that you took a discussion, an interview, a statement that was pertaining to the period of democratic Kampuchea? Was it during the period, the back end? Was it after? Can you help us?
I presume we're talking about 17 April 1975 through 7 January 1979. And if that's the temporal jurisdiction specified, the first, I would say, were in the opening days of January 79. I would guess maybe the 3rd or the 4th of January 1979.
Can you remember where you were and who the people were that you were taking the interviews from?
I was in the part of Cambodia that is opposite Da Phaya in Thailand, and I believe that was part of the then CPK Sector 5 of the Northwest Zone. There were some interviews that were done on what was pretty clearly the Thai side of the border, of that border, the Da Phaya Sector 5 border, and then some interviews that were done just inside the Cambodian side of that Da Phaya Sector 5 border.
And just sort of categories of people. Are we talking refugees? Are we talking members of the regime, lower cadre? Can you just give us some idea?
Yes. I mean, I suppose those that were interviewed on the Thai side, I think could be described as asylum seekers. Those who were interviewed on the Sector 5 side were people who were, to my knowledge, were ordinary people, not cadre, not armed forces combatants, who were on the run from the cooperatives in that part of Sector 5 that were beginning to disintegrate because of the impending arrival or feared arrival of the Vietnamese.
I'd like to go back. You were handed a document yesterday, which was an index of your work. Do you still have it, or can I provide you with a fresh one? Can you turn, please, to page 4? At the bottom, we have a heading number 2, header interviews with accused refugees and others. Now, I'd like to just concentrate on the first 2 items under the heading interviews with Khieu Samphan. Now, I can show you these if you need to see them, but can I deal first of all with item number 70 and that's an interview on the 4th of August 1980. Did you speak with Khieu Samphan on that day? And is there a record?
The answer is yes. To my recollection, that's the correct date. I believe the encounter was over 2 days because I spent a night in this location. And my recollection is that records, or a record, if you will, of the encounter, the interviews, the statements exist in, some of it was taped and some of it was handwritten into a notebook by this method of Steve Hedder's simultaneous interpretation into a notebook. So some of it was definitely taped. Not all of it was taped, if I recall correctly, but I made either handwritten transcriptions or at least notes on what was said to me.
I just want to ask you and show you, please, a document with Mr. President's permission. This is about item 69 on the list, and we've all got the document numbers, but I say them E3/198. Can I ask you to have a look at this? It's also IS 20.23. I'm just going to show you this record, please, Mr. Hedder, with the President's permission, and just see if this does, once you've read it, record any meeting with Khieu Samphan on the 17th of August 2005.
The President, you may proceed. Court officer is now directed to bring this hard copy for the witness for examination.
Can I say that counsel might be best looking at IS 20.23?
This one was not done by me, but one of the other persons with whom I was working. And if I recall correctly, this English, I don't know whether this is a court translation or a translation that I did from Khmer notes that were taken at the time. It looks more to me like a court translation than a translation I would have done. It doesn't have the peculiarities that are characteristic of my translation style.
Now, given that timing, August 2005, you were in Cambodia, you've said already. Do you remember seeing that document in its original form or some notes to do with this interview, or did you oversee these notes? Did you have any connection with this interview at the time, whether by looking at the notes, translating things? Does it bring anything back seeing that document?
My recollection is that the notes were done originally in handwritten Khmer, and then that at a subsequent point not too long after the interview occurred. I mean by that weeks or a month, not days or a year. The Khmer was input into a computer file. And this may well be a translation that's done from the computer file version of the earlier, one could say, original handwritten notes.
And in terms of the procedure for recording, you've described your procedures for recording. Was it, for the others in the team, the same system of questions and answers being recorded down? Did they have prepared questions? Was it audio recorded?
I'm pretty sure that the methodology, if you will, was the same as the one I described for myself. As you can see, these are not verbatim. They're not presented in a kind of verbatim format. Without knowing it, we were producing what I was later told are supposed to be called objective summaries.
Yes. Can I ask for that document back, please? Can you put that back? And can I move on using our index again to the next page on the index, which is page 5? And this has a heading of interviews with Ieng Sary. And we see an interview on the 4th of January 1999 and a previous interview on the 17th of December 1996. Can I deal with the 1996 ones first? And you'll see at item 74, 75 and 76. In relation to that day, we have audio recordings. So is it right that the interview with Ieng Sary on the 17th of December 1996 was audio recorded?
Yes. I mean, again, I would clarify, I would describe what happened as an encounter with Ieng Sary. And in the course of that encounter, there was a taped interview, taped with his agreement, taped mostly in the presence of his then de facto aide-de-camp, somebody by the name of E. Chien, who accompanied him to the place where the interview happened, which was in a hotel room in Chanthaburi in Thailand. In addition to the taped interview, there were some other conversations, including a conversation, a rather informal conversation, that happened over a meal in the hotel, downstairs in the hotel. So not everything that was exchanged between us, not everything that was said between us is reflected on those 3 tapes. But most of it's there.
I'm going to be asking you more detailed questions later on about this. This is really for verification purposes. And then dealing with the second one in time on the 4th of January 1999, can you help on how that was recorded by you? Was it audio tape? Was it your noting style that you've mentioned, or any other method?
Yes, that one was much more informal. we met in the lobby of the then Royal Phnom Penh Hotel here in Phnom Penh, a venue that no longer exists because it was destroyed in the so-called anti-Thai riots that subsequently occurred. And I had a little notebook, and we had, I would describe, a mostly quite informal, although in some places substantive, conversation, and I scribbled things down in my notebook.
Were you scribbling contemporaneously or after the event?
I think there were some things I did at the time and some things I supplemented later. I think the issues of substance I took at the time, matters relating to the locale of Central Committee documents and a few other very specific items, where some of the more informal stuff, the atmospherics, if you will, I think I only added later.
Thank you. Can I move to the next box on page 5, which is interviews with refugees? And can you just explain, I'm not looking for all the academic funding and the academic background, just who were you with? Is it right you undertook interviews on the Thai-Cambodian border in February, March 1980? And who were you with, first of all?
Yes, these interviews took place on the Thai side, I think entirely, of the Thai-Cambodian border in those months specified, February to March 1980. And for most, if not necessarily every last interview, I was accompanied by a Japanese journalist, Matsushita, from Kyoto News Service.
Now, I'm going to be asking to ask you questions about these refugee interviews later, but can I just clarify for verification purposes? Did you undertake every interview with Matsushita present for some, or can you help us now on that?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I think I did every interview myself. I think there were occasions on which I explained to Matsushita what was being said, and he asked me to make some additional queries. But I think it would be fair to say that 99.9% of it is me asking questions and me taking down the answers in the style that I've already twice now described.
Thank you. Can we move to the next heading on page 5, OCIJ interviews? And can you please just confirm that you did undertake some interviews when you were with OCIJ?
OCIJ.
That's item on page 5. The bottom box is headed OCIJ interviews.
Yes, those were done when I was employed by UNAKRT and assigned to the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges during the period of the judicial investigation.
Thank you. Can I take you to page 6? And if you look at items 94, 95, 96, 97 and 99, you'll see in the title box that it's got the name of the person and then ECCC-OCP. So do you recollect taking some statements, I think when Mr. Robert Petit was the head of that department?
Yes. Those are interviews done while I was, as it were, seconded from the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges to the Office of the Co-Prosecutors, and myself and a number of other people from the Office of the Co-Prosecutors, on some instances, including Robert Petit, did these interviews at the times indicated.
And then if we can go, please, to still on page 6, we have this heading of other interviews. And there's a couple here that I couldn't place in terms of fitting them in under other headings, frankly. Can I ask you to have a look at item 88? Well, let's deal with that perhaps item by item. 88 is a statement on the 7th of August 1990. And the document number for that one is E3/390, and the D number was D210/9. Mr. President, to assist on this point, can I hand this document to Mr. Hedder? Can you get me? Mr. President, can this please be handed to Mr. Hedder? And Mr. Hedder, I don't want you to mention the name of this witness. I just want you to help us, please, about the circumstances.
The President, you may proceed. Court officer, please get the document from the co-prosecutor and hand it over to the witness.
Yes, I did this interview at the time indicated in Phnom Penh with the person named, and as the document that you've handed me indicates, the interview was recorded, tape recorded, and this is not my translation, but a court translation of a transcription of that taped interview. And just for purposes of further clarification, this was done when I was at the Department of History of the Australian National University.
The President, Mr. Prosecutor and Mr. Witness, thank you very much. The time is now appropriate for adjournment. The chamber will adjourn now and resume at 11. Court officer is instructed to assist the witness during the break and have him return to this courtroom by 11. The court is now adjourned.